All right, guys, today is Monday, August 29th, 2022. Today marks 40 days I have left to finish 55 for an upcoming show on October 8th, which is looking pretty bleak, but there is light at the end of the tunnel because I'm trying to focus on just getting the engine and everything to work properly and get it, semi kind of tuned. So you guys know I've been having a little bit of issues with my alternator not charging. Let me rephrase that. It charges. The alternator's charging that battery, and then when the electric fan kicks on, it's still charging the battery, but it is pulling a draw on it. Like, for instance, the little odometer gauge here for the volts, it goes from 14 volts to 12 volts on the gauge. But when you check it back there, it's like 1250 to 1260, 1265. So it is charging, it's just low. Now, originally I thought it was probably not having the bypass wire from the hot post on the back of the alternator to the hot post on the starter. So I did start putting that in there. But before I actually had another issue here, I was timing the car the other day with a timing light. So what I noticed was at one point the fan was on and it was sitting here idling really low. I've got the idle turned down pretty low so I could hear the camshaft. I come around here and I check the temperature gauge, and it was a little over 200 degrees. It's probably about 205-ish on the temp gauge. So I was like, okay, so what's up with that? And I got to thinking, okay, for some reason, now the engine's running hot. Now, there could be a reason for that, which I can tell already because I had this same fan on a 56 Chevy I used to drive. This fan is normally very loud, and I noticed it's just not that loud. Once it comes on, that alternator is struggling trying to keep up with the demand of that fan, so it's got the voltage down on it, which basically means the fan's not going to be spinning at its fullest RPM, which can cause a heating up issue. I never had an issue in my 56 small block with that same fan on it. So anyway, I think, the alternator is probably the biggest part of it, but the temperature issue could also be caused by another thing, and this is what really got me to thinking about this. In my alternator video I posted, one of my subscribers, Turkey SSR, asked me, how did I determine the alternator pulley size? So that's when it kind of really hit home for me, and I was like, hey, wait a minute, because I bought these like 9 years ago, and I can't even remember stuff from last week, let alone 9 years ago. This is a March underdrive pulley set, and I can tell you this will be my last underdrive pulley set. So this is what was on the car. Really nice set, really cool looking, takes a 6-rib belt, looks really trick on the car. An underdrive pulley set is supposed to give you more horsepower, like, I don't even remember the horsepower rating. What they do is they give you a smaller crankshaft pulley and enlarge the water pump and the alternator pulley. So basically at idle, your alternator's not spinning as fast as it's supposed to be, and also your water pump's not spinning as fast as it's supposed to be. So this is probably my biggest issue, including the bypass wire for the alternator. So I think I'm getting ready to kill two birds with one stone right here. So I took the pulleys off, and I mean, you can see the difference right there than the alternator pulleys. This is stock GM set. The water pump is not a huge difference, but it's almost a ½ inch difference when you measure with a caliper down in here on where the pulley or the belt goes. So that crankshaft pulley, I could literally set that down inside that GM pulley. So these pulleys are off an 87 or 88 Chevy Caprice. I got these from a salvage, I don't know, probably 2 or 3 years ago. This is a pretty unique set. They only produced these for a couple of years. They came on the G-bodies, the big cars that had small block Chevy 305s in them. They also come on the square bodies, like my 87 GMC long bed has these same pulleys. This has V-belts, but it has, for your alternator, it's a 4-rib belt. So it's a little skinnier than the 6-rib that was on this March set. But anyway, I've always liked these pulleys. I like that wide belt look. It just kind of gives a little bit more modern look. But I think this, changing these pulleys out to the GM ones is probably, and the bypass wire is probably going to fix both issues, I hope. This is the same pulley set I had on my 56, and I never had any problems with that 56. So anyway, we'll just have to try it. but I'm pretty sure this is going to fix my issue, because when you turn the idle down on the car, let me just start this over. When I first started this car the other day, and I posted the video, to break the camshaft in, you got to turn your RPMs up. So I turned the idle screw in a little bit and got the RPM up on it, and I let it run for 20 minutes. It never got over 200 degrees. Never did. For 20 minutes running, it never got over that. And I had on the gauge, it was like just a little above 12, I think, if I remember right, after the fan kicked on. But when the fan's not on, it's 14 volts. Now that I've turned the RPMs down with it sitting here, it's worse. I test drove the car to the end of the block the other day, and I posted the video. And I noticed I had, after the fan was on, it had 14 volts instead of 12 or 1250. So once the engine got a little RPM in it, like cruising down the block, and I didn't even get out of second gear, it just needed that little bit more. It had more voltage going through it. So that is more than likely the culprit, is the pulley diameter on the water pump and the alternator is too large. So I am going to correct that and put it back to stock GM. So that's pretty interesting right there. But again, another one of those high dollar, well, you know, an expensive aftermarket fancy part that I've had to take off the car because stuff just doesn't want to work right. So so far it's just been a waste of money. But that's where I'm at. So I've got the alternator bypass wire. I've started installing it, making it and installing it, but I got to get the alternator back on first. Now, I just painted these pulleys yesterday, and this is actually the same paint that's on the body. This is single stage urethane, and I can move them around. Like, I can touch them and they're dry. They're not leaving marks, but I wanted to put these outside in the sun today and let them cook before I tried bolting them on the car, because, you know, when you got fresh paint, you go to put bolts on stuff, it's just going to wrinkle the paint out around it. So I was wanting it to harden up a little bit, but it's a cloudy, nasty day outside, so there's no sun out there. Or there wasn't a little bit ago. I probably better check now, but anyway, once I get these bolted back on and get coolant back in the radiator, I can start it up and see what's going on, because now I can check the voltage, I can keep an eye on the water temperature, but I can also get a vacuum gauge on my carburetor and get it all dialed in. So kind of amazing. That's more than likely, I mean, I'm like 100% sure it's the bypass wire and too large, not having the bypass wire in and too large of pulley on the alternator. It's probably why it's not charging, because when this fan was in that 56, it was loud when it was on. This fan is not, I can tell it's not as loud as it used to be, because it's not pulling, it's not getting enough amps to it basically to make it spin fast enough. So between going smaller pulley on the water pump and getting the proper voltage to the fan, it'll cool it. I will tell you guys, I learned this the hard way back in the 90s. I went to my local AutoZone and I bought a 16-inch diameter fan, electric fan, and put on a car. And I took the fan, mechanical fan, off of it. That car overheated in traffic, but once you're going down the road, it's fine because it's getting air through the radiator. Come to find out, those fans down there are only like 800 CFM or something. It's way, way too small CFM a fan for a primary fan, not having a mechanical fan on the engine. So back when I bought this one, what I had read and found out from one of the manufacturers was it was, I believe, I'm going off memory, I think it's 2000 CFM is minimum for a primary fan for a small block Chevy, like a 350, which I have a 406 now. But anyway, this is like a 2150 CFM or something. But I never had a problem out of the engine running hot in that 56. But anyway, so don't go buy an AutoZone special fan and put on your car as a primary fan, because it ain't big enough. Now, if you put air conditioning on your car, that puts a bigger load on the front of the engine, and I don't think a 2100 is big enough. It seemed like it's definitely a bigger fan you got to have, but I don't remember the CFM. So you'll have to check with the manufacturer. But and it's basically, the more stuff's on your engine and the more cubic inch your engine, the bigger the fan needs to be. So keep that in mind if you're going to do electric. But back when I built my first 55 Chevy, I had overheating issues all the time, and I tried all kinds of stuff. I had a 5-blade flex fan on it first without a fan shroud, and the car overheated in traffic. But going on the highway, it was fine. So I upgraded to a 7-blade fan, and I put the fan closer to the fan by putting a longer spacer on it. And although it helped, it still would overheat in traffic. So I ended up buying a shroud, and that helped as well. But the longer you sit in traffic, which I did a hot rod power tour in like 1998 or 1999, and that's when I found out I had overheating issues, because we were stopped for a long period of time in summer. So, you know, it gets 100-something degrees around here in the summer, so you got to have a pretty good cooling system. But anyway, the 56, I did another Tri-5 that I put a big electric fan on. I never had any overheating issues anymore. And then I built a 56 4-door Bel Air, and I put this electric fan on there, and I never had overheating issues. So I know this setup works with stock GM pulleys, but it does not work, however, too well with aftermarket underdrive pulleys. So take off the fancy stuff and put on the old GM stuff. That's the theme of this car, it seems like. But man, I've got other bugs to work out on the car. I showed, you know, in the test drive, I had some clicking going on. All 4 center caps are loose, so I've got to fix that. My speedometer is not working, and I know the head's not locked up. I can spin the thing on the back of the speedometer head, and the deal moves. This is an aftermarket cable, and I'm assuming the inner cable is not long enough to go through everything. So today or tomorrow, I'm going to pull it off the back of the transmission tail shaft and spin it and see if this spins up here, see how much slack's in it. But most likely, I'm going to have a new inner cable that's longer. And then my fuel gauge doesn't work. I should have tested it before I put it in the car, but I did not. I did try a jumper ground on it the other day, and it didn't change the gauge at all. It's got like, I don't know, 7 gallons of gas in it, so it should be, you know, up there a little bit, but it's past E. That fuel gauge I know worked because I had that cluster in a 56 Chevy that I used to drive every day. So I'm assuming it's probably the aftermarket sending unit, and that's going to suck if I got to take that out, of course, but it's just the new car bugs, and it just depends on the car. When you build one, you're always going to have issues. And then once I get this dialed in where it's in here, once I get it all put together and actually take it on the highway, there's probably going to be more bugs that I'm going to have to, you know, fix. But I have not started it since I modded the carb and cleaned the spark plugs with baking soda. Once I get all the pulleys on and I can alternator back on and hooked up, I can start it and see where it's at from there. But I'm pretty sure it's probably going to be pretty well dialed in at that point after I tune the carburetor with vacuum gauge and stuff. But anyway, guys, sorry there's no physical labor in the video. I just wanted to get you guys caught up on what's going on, and I think I figured out that it's probably the underdrive pulleys causing this issue. I should have known better, because back in the 90s I had a Grand National Buick that a friend of mine had a Fox body Mustang, and we were always going at it with each other on the street. We even drove to the drag strip and raced a couple of times. He put underdrive pulleys on his Fox body Mustang, and we noticed that it would overheat at idle in traffic, and also the voltage gauge was lower than until you got going down the road, and then it was okay. So I should have known from that, but I guess you just got to spend the money, learn on your own, I guess, type of thing. But I can tell you this, I would not recommend underdrive pulleys, and they may work for some people, but they're not working for me. Thanks for watching.